Hello, it's Dr. Rhonda Johnson. Today's Thursday, September 30th, 2021, and today I'm going to be talking about quarantine. I have a good friend who's a pediatrician, and she said, please make a video about quarantine, why it's necessary, the purpose, and how long. So here we go. Quarantine. First, what does the word mean? Well, folks, it basically means you go into isolation after you have been exposed to an infectious or contagious disease. And we all know right now that big infectious and contagious disease is COVID-19. So let's talk about what the CDC says first. So the CDC says you should quarantine if you've been in close contact with someone who has COVID-19 unless you're fully vaccinated. So let's go over close contact. Close contact, according to the CDC, means that you have been exposed within 6 feet of someone for at least 15 minutes or more in a 24-hour period. That's what exposure means. Now, if you're fully vaccinated, the CDC says you do not need to quarantine after contact with someone who has COVID, unless you are having symptoms. And we'll talk about symptoms at the end. But fully vaccinated people should get tested 3 to 5 days after their exposure, even if you don't have symptoms. And folks, I'm going to say this, if you're unvaccinated, because we know a lot of people are unvaccinated, just get tested after exposure. Wait 3 to 5 days. And if you're unvaccinated, I would say wait 3 days to get tested. Okay? All right, now fully vaccinated and unvaccinated folks, let's just say everybody, you need to wear a mask if you've been exposed to someone with COVID, indoors or in public, anytime you're around other people, for either 14 days after exposure or until your test result is negative. Why 14 days? Because the incubation period for COVID can be as long as 14 days. Now, for Delta, it's usually much quicker, 3 to 5 days. But there's still some other strains. There's some alpha variant strains, and there are a few other strains still around. Not much. The Delta variant is the dominant strain right now. Okay, so now here's the caveat. Local health departments or state health departments have jurisdiction in their geographic domain. So you have to always follow the recommendations of your local or state health department about quarantining during this pandemic. So how long should you stay in quarantine? Again, the recommendations may vary depending on where you live. So I can talk about Pennsylvania since I live here. The State Department of Health says even if you're fully vaccinated, if you have COVID symptoms, if you have COVID-19 symptoms, or you test positive and you are able to recover at home, you can leave your sick room and home after 3 things have happened. 1, that there's been at least 10 days since your symptoms first appeared, and 24 hours have passed without fever and you're not using any fever-reducing medication. So 10 days since day 1 symptoms, 24 hours without fever and no fever-reducing medicine, and your other symptoms have improved. Now, your loss of taste and smell might linger on for months, so don't count that. So that's basically quarantine. Now, what about close contacts? It gets kind of tricky, and there's no uniform guidelines. So again, I'll share with you what the State Department of Health of Pennsylvania says in terms of people who have no symptoms, but who have been exposed to someone with COVID and have to quarantine. Again, folks, the principle of quarantining is that you stop the transmission. This virus, for example, one person with Delta variant typically can infect 8 people, and then they go on to infect 8 other people, and then they go on to infect 8 other people. So you can see how fast you have transmission to so many people with this highly contagious disease. So quarantining breaks the chain, folks. It breaks the chain of transmission in a nutshell. So according to the Pennsylvania Department of Health, The safest approach is 14 days of quarantine after exposure, even if you're not having symptoms. But no one's going to do that anymore. Truthfully, nobody quarantines for 14 days. So this Pennsylvania Department of Health offers another approach, and I think that's probably the most practical. The Pennsylvania Department of Health says, get tested. 5 days after exposure, this is if you're fully vaccinated, to a person after exposure to a contact who has tested positive. So Pennsylvania Department of Health says if you're fully vaccinated, get a COVID test. Now you want to get the PCR test. That is the most accurate. That's the gold standard. That's the most reliable. And now most results are coming back within 24 hours. So if your PCR test is negative and you have no symptoms, the Pennsylvania Department of Health says you can stop quarantine at day 7 if your test is negative and you have no symptoms. Okay? All right. Now, here's the most important thing that I want to say. What can you do? Where can you go when you're in quarantine? Folks, stay home. As much as possible, if you live with somebody else, stay in a specific sick room. If you live by yourself, you got the reign of your home or apartment or wherever you live. Stay away from other people and also stay away from your pets. Now, I know some of you may have a pet and you live by yourself. Well, if you can get somebody else to care for your pet while you're in quarantine, that's great. If not, put your mask on while you're around your pet and open up those windows because, again, COVID-19 can survive in animals. Don't go to public areas. Only leave your home to get medical care. All right, I hope that makes sense, and I hope it's been easy to understand. So, in summary, if a friend, family member, employer, or school says you've been exposed and you've had close contact, please quarantine and get a PCR test. The CDC says you can be tested anywhere between 3 to 5 days after exposure. Also, I want to remind you to know the symptoms because everything is dependent upon you knowing if you have symptoms. And the symptoms of Delta are a little bit tricky, folks. It's different than the original Wuhan strain. Fever and cough are present, but most people with Delta feel like they've had a bad cold. They have a headache or they might have pressure in their head, sinus congestion, runny nose, ticklish in their throat, or sore throat. Those seem to be more common with Delta. And excessive sneezing is also a symptom. You might not get loss of taste or smell with Delta until 5 or 6 days into this, or you might not get it at all. And again, because a lot of kids have COVID right now, pediatricians are saying that in kids, it can start as a high fever, body aches, runny nose, stuffy nose, and cough. And they've also seen kids that just present with a dry, scratchy, irritated, sore throat with mouth congestion. Pediatricians also say they've seen children coming in their offices with croup-like symptoms, and they test positive for COVID. They also have had kids coming in with vomiting and diarrhea who test positive for COVID. So remember, in kids, Delta can mimic a whole lot of common pediatric infectious diseases. And parents, you will not be able to diagnose this yourself. Get your children tested. I know when I had COVID, the person I saw thought I had a cold, and I insisted on getting a PCR test because I knew this wasn't an ordinary cold that I was feeling. So get the PCR test. All right, I hope this has been helpful. Please share this video if you think it's been helpful. As always, my views are my own. My only intent is to help save a life. Be careful. Take care, folks. And as always, have a blessed day.